When we talk about language, we are talking about understanding the components of everything, for without language, how would you be able to communicate effectively? Look at this white piece of paper with black ink. Without the words and color, this paper would be blank. And likewise, without the first people of color, the history of the world will be just as blank. So what I'm saying is, black is the source of all information, but to understand any information, we must first understand the language. And to understand this ancient language, you must first acknowledge the writings on the walls of the ancient ones, those of ancient Kemetic or Kemet, and those of ancient Sumer. Welcome to Back to the Basics, where you learn facts, hope you embrace it. Watch, like, share, bring in awareness. Watch, like, share, bring in awareness. I'm fearless. Welcome to Back to the Basics, where you learn facts, hope you embrace it. Watch, like, share, bring in awareness. Watch, like, share, bring in. There are evil people out here that comes in all shades of color, yet with the same motive. These evil people do not want you to know the truth, and so they have managed to create what's called modern standard dialects they call languages. What this means is that the entire world right now is speaking made up languages called modern. So what they did is clip the root from the plant, and they do this by teaching dialects without its roots. And in doing this, they have destroyed generations of growth, and now there's no seed to the true meaning of words. All of you as children were taught modern dialect, and so you will never really know the truth or the true meaning of words because you don't know its root. And what that does is it makes you ignorant to the origin, which gives you the true meaning of words, which will therefore encourage you to believe in what the evil one has taught you to be right. For example, I'm speaking fishhook right now, or what you call English, the dialect of the Angles. And if I were to call you a nice person in this dialect, you would think that that's a very nice gesture. However, the etymological meaning of this word nice is actually foolish, ignorant, silly, stupid. Let's do this again. If I were to call you a queen, like some brothers do when they become conscious, like Grand Rising Queen, you would think that it means a female sovereign of some form of royalty. But the etymological meaning of the word queen is actually prostitute.
Message!
So you see, by not knowing the root of the language, you become ignorant to the true meaning of the word, which in turn keeps you ignorant. It is very sad when I see Muslims, Christians, Hebrews, or whatsoever they call themselves, teach and scream, "I have the truth," or "I know the way." And when you look at the books in which they are reading from, it is always someone else's mistranslation into another dialect, whether it be the Quran, Torah, or the Bible. Yet their teaching is supposed to save you from the devil. This is pure ignorance, and the root of the word ignorance is ignore. And when you ignore the facts, you breed belief, which means that you do not know. Our ancient ancestors understood how the language was shaped and how it grew because they knew the root, being the original planters who created the language. But when evil people ripped it like a plant from its roots, it put the world in a state of confusion. And now people do not know what is right from wrong. And because of this, no one speaks a language today. What people speak today are dialects. So, what is the difference, you may be wondering? Well, the word language comes from the Latin word lingua, which means tongue. And it is the root of a systematic means of communication by the use of sounds and symbols employed and understood by a community as an expression of thought. It is also the association of words and methods of their combination into sentences. Now, a dialect, on the other hand, is simply the genre of speech distinguished from the root or generally accepted literary language. So in other words, a dialect descends from a language. And of course, when a dialect comes from a language, there are fundamental changes where you may or may not be able to see the link unless you know the root language. All of the so-called spoken languages of the world today are being spoken in modern and not in the ancient tones. So what does this tell you? It should tell you that no one is speaking a language today. Knowing this ancient language is extremely important for the mental state of most of you who have been put under a spell of ignorance through words. It has been taught that the first language spoken was Cuneiform of the ancient Sumerians, dating back to approximately 3500 BC. This is not entirely wrong, but it is also not entirely true. You see, the ancient Tamarians, wrongfully called Egyptians by the Greeks language, which is wrongfully called hieroglyphics, was even older, dating back to approximately 10,000 BC. And let me tell you something that's going to blow your mind. Did you know that both cuneiform and hieroglyphics are in fact the same ancient language? Yet, they were given Greek and Latin names in place of the original name.
Message!
Now, what does that tell you? It should tell you that hieroglyphics and cuneiforms are not the true names of this ancient language. Let's explore this fact. Hieroglyphics is from the Greek word hiero, meaning sacred, and the Greek word glyph, meaning carven, which is not the name of the Kemetic language, but a description of the Epituric script. The word cuneiform is from the Latin word cunis, meaning wedge, and the word form is from the Latin word forma, meaning shape and looks, which again is not the name of the language, but a description of the wedge-shaped script. These names that you have grown accustomed to are nothing more than European names, just like the name Egyptian and Ethiopian, to hide the real names that the ancient people called their own language, as well as what they call themselves. So in actuality, hieroglyphics and cuneiform are both the same language with slight alterations in different scripts for different periods of time, development, inventions, and influences. Just as Arabic and Hebrew are the same dialect, with slight alterations in different scripts. For example, the word shalom in Hebrew means peace, and the word salam in Arabic also means peace. The word for son in Hebrew is ben, and the word for son in Arabic is ibn. You can clearly see the similarities. Now, some would say that hieroglyphic and cuneiform were just scripts and not spoken languages. And being a descendant of these ancient people with ancient records, I would kindly say that you're wrong. For even modern sign language can be spoken by people who are not dumb. No pun intended. Linguists, scholars, preachers, and laymen all try to say which language they think is authentic and which language was first to prove their own points. The Arabs would say that Arabic was the first language. The Hebrews would say that it's Hebrew, and the Hindus would say that it's Sanskrit. It is a known fact that throughout religious books, dialects were either named after a son, in most cases, or after an incident that took place in that particular area. And no one in these modern times seems to be perturbed by that fact. So, since most of the dialects that most of you accept as a so-called language today actually come from these plagiarized religious books, then it becomes necessary to use these scriptures just to make a point. So the source of all known languages of the scriptures that concerns people today comes from Shem, one of Noah's triplet sons. Now from Shem's sons came the dialect of Syriac from Ashur, which means level plain, the second son of Shem, which gave birth to all the Arabic dialects. Therefore, if you're a Misraim or Egyptian and you speak Arabic, then your dialect is really Egyptic. The same principle applies to people who reside in other countries like Iraq, whose dialect is really Iraqic, Syrians, whose dialect is really Syriac, Libyans, whose dialect is really Libyak, and so forth. This same principle applies for the Hebrew dialect, which comes from Aramic, named after Aram, which means high, the fifth son of Shem. So likewise, if a person says they are an Israelite, your dialect is really Israelic. Galilean, your dialect is really Galileic. Nazarene, your dialect is really Nazaric. And Judean, your dialect is really Judaic, and etc. But of course, that is not the case today. And nobody really cares unless someone of my skin hue says I have an ancient language that predates all your biblical languages. And all of a sudden, everyone, including lost Nubians, begin to care about its origin. Knowing this, I ask you all the question, who was the first person on planet Earth, according to the scriptures? And the common answer is Adam. Now, it is also taught that Adam spoke in the garden with God, and Eve even spoke to the so-called serpent. And of course, all those of their descendants in this scripture also spoke, all the way from Adam down to a man named Noah. So, tell me exactly, what was the language they were speaking? Being there is no written language recorded for that span of religious time in religious books. Now, if you are one of those people who want right knowledge, because you are tired of the myths and the legends and you simply just want the facts beyond any shadow of doubt, then I encourage you to listen with a critical mind. To understand the name of this ancient mystery language they spoke, it is necessary that you learn about prehistory, which is before modern records, and it is before religious books were introduced to you. Now, I've explained previously that religious stories were all plagiarized from the Enuma Elish and Gilgamesh epics tablets, as well as ancient Egyptian records, which were recorded either in cuneiform or hieroglyphics writings, which are in fact the same language but given European names that you all have accepted without question in these modern times. Now, did you ever wonder why these ancient tablets are often broken in fragments? Well, it is due to the fact that when dynasties changed, in order to erase the history of the previous dynasty, historical artifacts were moved outside of the district and replaced with the present dynasty's writings. Early cuneiform was written in columns from top to bottom, just like Chinese script, which also comes from cuneiform, and the Japanese and Korean script are derived from Chinese script. Now, during the 3rd millennium, cuneiform came to be written from right to left. About the same time these changes were occurring in cuneiform, it was then adopted by the Akkadians for their language. So, the Akkadian language was also written in cuneiform. The oldest Akkadian cuneiform inscriptions date from the Old Akkadian or Early Akkadian period during the inscription of the great ruler Sargon, 2334 to 2279 before the Christian era, who your scriptures call Nimrod, who relates to the Tower of Babel story, which pertains to the confusion of tongues. That's kind of strange, ain't it? So the Assyrians and Babylonian dialects descended from Akkadian. The fact that cuneiform writing system was borrowed and used for many spoken dialects, it was thought to be the oldest script. And since the Gilgamesh epics and the Enuma Elish tablets predates the Torah, Bible, and Quran, they also give more accurate accounts of the events concerning the recreation and the flood of Noah. I would like to highlight the fact that the Babylonian tablets also perceive their deities in human form and acknowledge that there must be 2 deities, both male and female, for creation to take place. Unlike the modern scriptures, which were purposely mistranslated from these tablets, making you, the modern readers, think that the term Elohim is some form of spook or apparition, when in fact, according to these ancient tablets, they were a group of advanced human beings called the Anuna. So, when these Anuna descended on earth, in which they call Ki, they became known as the Anunnaki or the Anunnaki, and they had a language, and that language was cuneiform. And since they are the gods in whom the biblical recreation stories originates from, then it stands to reason that the Adam of your scriptures, whose biblical name is Zakar and whose real name in the Babylonian tablets is Adapa, also spoke some form of cuneiform. This Adapa or Zakar was a Watusi of prehistory, born from mixed Chaldean parents, Atum and Lilith, who spoke Ugarit, a combination of cuneiform and Hindi. Chaldee is the southern region of the Babylonian Empire, which is part of the Persian Gulf, which later yielded their own dialect called Chaldean. The people in this area were called Phoenicians and Assyrians. Originally, these were dark-skinned people, descendants of Negroids mixed with East Indians or Hindus. Yet in time, they were supplanted by Europeans, your scriptures call Canaanites or Sidonians. Of course, in time, the Greeks recorded these people as Phoenicians as well. So now most people believe the lie that the original Phoenicians were Europeans when in fact they were not. These Euro-Phoenicians eventually mixed in with the dark-skinned Phoenicians and became mixed mulattoes who reside in an area near the mountain of Lebanon called Ugarit, now known as Ras Shamsara, an ancient city north of Syria. Their language was also Phoenician, which was written in cuneiform. Now, Eve, whose name is Nekeba according to the scriptures, but whose real name is Titi according to the Babylonian text, was an African pygmy of the original Tahite tribe, and she also spoke a dialect of cuneiform. The merging of these 2 tribes, the Pygmies and the Watusis, gave birth to what should have been called Adamic in the Torah, since this was the dialect spoken by Adam or Adapa of the scriptures, since scriptural dialects are often named after the men, and since it is believed that Adam was the first person, then this dialect would have been named after him. I hope you see the logic. So, from Cuneiform comes this dialect Adamic, which later became Ashuric and Aramic. You should now realize that all of the dialects of these modern scriptures were not pure languages. And you should also realize that Cuneiform, as well as hieroglyph, is the language that has not been mentioned by name in any of the scriptures. And that is because this language came before the scriptures. Armenian, another Aramic dialect, gave birth to the Indo-European language spoken by the people of Europe, Southwest Asia, and India. The Persian language, also called Farsi, is considered part of the Indo-Aryan language. However, Persian was then divided into 3 different languages for 3 different eras of time. Old Persian was written in Cuneiform, Middle Persian was written in Aramic, and Modern Persian is what Arabs are calling Arabic today. Sanskrit is the classical literary language of the Hindus, from which the Prakrits and the modern Indo-Aryan language came. The Prakrit is the collective name for dialects of northern and central India arising from or connected to Sanskrit, like Urdu, which is from Persian script, and Hindi Arabic language. Now, I want you to keep in mind, again, that Cuneiform was not the name of this ancient language that many modern dialects descended from. There was another language, which is the same language in script, that came about more than 10,000 years ago in ancient Kemetic, or what they're calling Egypt, during prehistoric era. Prehistory relates to information before recorded history. So this language script was called hieroglyphics by the Greeks. This script originally only consisted of 24 symbols. The symbols, which were pictures, did not translate to those pictures but to sounds as letters. For example, the symbol of the owl translates into the letter M. Our Nubian ancestors continued to use this writing system until about 400 AD. When the Greeks invaded, the language began to change, and the script started to be written in Greek alphabets with several extra letters added for Kemetic and Egyptian sounds that did not exist in Greek. This late form of this Egyptian dialect is called Coptic. The Coptic dialect is now extinct. It was, however, spoken in early Christian times. Eventually, Coptic was replaced by a form of Arabic, the language that is presently spoken in Egypt today. And since there was no one left who knew how to read or write or speak the ancient language on the temples, it was thought to have died. For more than 1,000 years, travelers to Nubia were fascinated by the mysterious symbols they saw carved in the walls of temples and tombs. But since no one could tell them what the carving symbols meant, these invaders eventually began making up translations. What is being called hieroglyphics today has 3 different scripts. 1 is hieroglyphics, 2 is heretic, and 3 is demotic. Unlike the letters in the English alphabet, hieroglyphics can be written in more than one direction. That means that it can be written from left to right, like English, or from right to left, like Ashuric, Syriac, and Aramic. Or it can be written in columns from top to bottom, like cuneiform. You can always tell which way the carving is supposed to be read by looking at animals, plants, and people. If they face left, then start reading from the left. If they face right, begin at the right. In other words, read towards the face. The direction in which hieroglyphic text was written depends on the kind of text it was and how it was used. Now, the heretic dialect came into Kemetic or Egypt by not so ancient Egyptians who left and then came back from Sumer, bringing in Semitic dialects into ancient Kemetic. And the Phoenician dialect, which is the combination of cuneiform and Hindi, developed into demotic. So, what is the name of this mystery language? Some would say Metu Neta, but this is not the name of the language. This is just a mere statement stating the words of the gods. But who are these gods really? Well, these gods were none other than the Ogdoads, the celestial beings from Sirius and Orion, Revelation 12:8, whose names are Nun and Nunet, deities of the water abyss, Het and Hehet, deities of infinite space, Ket and Kiket, deities of darkness, and Amun and Amunet, deities of the hidden powers. When you take the first letter of their names, you can rearrange them to make the Temenian word Ankh, which means life, for they were responsible for the germination of life on this planet, for they are the primordial water deities who existed when this was completely a water planet. And yes, they had a language. From their departure from the heavenly skies to the planet Earth, these 8 water beings represented genetic shifts every 4 generations, giving birth to various types of humans that eventually dwelt on the dry land. Perhaps this is where the many legends and stories of mermaids actually came from. From them came the Eneds, or the majestic 9, consisting of Shu and Tefnut, Geb, Nut, Asar, Aset, Neptit, Satuk, headed by Atum. And they spoke the same language as the Ogdoads. Many indigenous African tribes came out of them, and over time, through migration, the ancient language became dialects. After many meteor showers that hit the earth, many of these ancient African tribes were destroyed. The oldest remaining tribe of today can be found in South Africa amongst the Bushmen, Khoisans. Now, the Khoisans language, called Khoikhoi, is really a dialect, for it is a mixture of other African dialects, and it incorporates many click sounds. So again, I ask you, what was this ancient mystery language that our ancient ancestors spoke? Well, that ancient mystery language was in fact called Nuwapic. The word Nuwapic comes from Nuwapic, and one who speaks Nuwapic is called a Nuwapian, whose cultural way of life is called Nuwapu. Nuwapu means to convey a message that results in sound right reasoning, so there must be a conveyor and a listener of the message. Now, the word message is key here. The message is life, and the conveyor is existence. Now, in these modern times, the word for messenger is angel, from the Greek word angelos. An angel is a celestial being that comes with a message. This should tell you that the name Nuwapian is in reference to a heavenly host, or in other words, God's own angels. The word for host in the Bible is Saba, meaning an organized army of beings often called angels, which has nothing to do with spirit beings with wings and halos, but rather with beings from the heavens above before they came down to earth. Thus, you'll find that we Nuwapians also refer to ourselves as Sabaeans, or simply Sabians, the heavenly hosts. And thus this ancient language implies that our language is the language of God, or Pa Neteru, for the angels were the last ones who spoke to the Neterus, or what you term God. Now, the closest reference to the Nuwapic script on earth can be found in Napata, which is Sudan, and Meroe, which is Ethiopia today, a region south of Egypt, but in time immemorial, they were a part of Egypt. The original script of Nuwapic that you call hieroglyphic was really called Suf. Over time, through migration, Meroe script became Sabian, and its spoken form, being a dialect of Nuwapic, was more Semitic. Later, it became an Arabic mixture of Syriac and Aramic mixture mixed with Phoenician to become Hebrew, Amharic, and Ge'ez. Then Ethiopic and Sudanese mixed with Greek and Latin to become Coptic. Yet, all of these so-called languages are mere dialects of Nuwapic. Nuwapic is the mother language, and that is why when you hear someone speaking it or see someone writing it, it appears like Nuwapic words are from these dialects, when in actuality, these dialects are from Nuwapic. It should be more than clear now that someone did not want you to know the original name of the world's first people, nor the name of their language. In right knowledge, we accept as fact that there are devils in all races who are willing to do the will of evil. And so doing this, they also help to enslave the minds of the children of Pa-Netu in spiritual and in mental ignorance, which is the result of belief without facts. This is the truth. You can either accept it or reject it. I'm Kefre, and this is Back to the Basic. Facts we stated. You wanna know something? Go back to basics. Mozart trapping was called the Matrix. The world civilized, yet it's hard to face it. So I spread truth, hope you